Hi everyone, my name's Emily February. I'm also known as Ranger M. I'm an environmental communicator and educator, and I get to talk to a lot of different people about all things nature and conservation. I love to knowledge share, and that's what I want to do with you. So come on, let's go learn with Ranger M. Have you ever considered going into the environmental or conservation career sector? Well, this season I'm going to talk to several different young professionals who are taking different journeys, and they're going to give us different insider knowledge on different classes to take, different paths to take on their way through post-secondary and their early careers. Today I'm joined by Brendon Samuels, who is completing his PhD and is very involved in his community. So come on, let's go catch up with Brendon. Brendon, thanks for joining us today. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about yourself and maybe your schooling background.
So I'm currently finishing my PhD at Western University. I'm in the Department of Biology. My background is a bit of a winding road. I went to the University of Guelph and I was thinking about maybe becoming a veterinarian.
Oh, wow.
I worked at a couple of veterinarian clinics and pet stores, and I quickly realized it wasn't for me. At that point in my undergrad, I discovered psychology, which I found really interesting, and I started learning about the brain. And I took up an interest in neuroscience. Between my undergrad and thinking about grad school, I took a break of a couple years. I actually worked as a baker, which was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Learned to make bread. And I volunteered at a lab at York University, learned a fair bit. And I came to Western in 2016 to start my master's degree in the neuroscience program. I did a project comparing how humans and songbirds, a type of songbird called the European starling, perceive the rhythmic organization of sound. And after I finished my master's, I thought, if I'm going to do a PhD, I'd like to do something a bit more practically focused. And that's how I found my way into the biology department doing the research that I do now.
Very fun. How did you choose your universities?
I wanted an undergraduate program that had breadth, right? I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted. I knew I was interested in sciences, maybe biology, and I looked at what schools offer the most degree programs and specializations. And being interested in zoology and working with animals, the University of Guelph, as one of the standalone vet schools in Canada, stood out. And so that's how I ended up at Guelph. For coming to Western, it was really about finding a researcher that was doing work I was interested in. Western had a unique combination of music researchers and bird researchers.
Oh, wow.
And for the project I described, it was really beneficial to have access to both sets of expertise. And so I was co-supervised between two different labs in those subject areas. For me, choosing a university was about where I would be comfortable. I think there's a lot of pressure in high school of like, I have to figure out what I'm going to do with my whole life. Like, I have to pick a school. It's going to change everything. It's also where you're going to spend 4 years of your life that are really formative. And so you need to figure out like, where are you going to be able to thrive? Like, what does the community look like? What is important for your lifestyle? And London really stood out to me as a nice place to be. And so that's how I ended up here. And I liked Western so much, I decided to stick around for my PhD.
Very nice. So we've actually heard from you before briefly on the show. You were representing Bird Friendly London. And where in your journey did you kind of start getting involved in that program?
The research that I do now is focusing on a conservation problem. I study solutions for preventing birds from crashing into windows on buildings, which is a weird problem because it's one that a lot of people can identify with. When I ask a crowd, how many of you have had a bird hit your window? Almost every hand goes up. And yet we don't think about how that problem scales, the fact that it kills billions of birds on the continent every year. So it's a big issue. And I was approaching it from a biological perspective of trying to understand like, okay, how do birds actually, see glass on a building? If you wanted to mark glass so birds would notice it, like how would you design something equivalent to like a stop sign for a bird? As I was doing my research, I was walking around buildings and looking for where birds were hitting glass. And I was finding quite a lot of them injured and killed. And it was emotionally difficult work, but it also renewed my motivation to not only understand the problem, but also like, how do we solve it, right? Like, it's not just about the mechanisms, it's also how do we take the solutions that exist or may come into existence and apply them in the real world. And in trying to figure out how to do that, I recognized it as a social problem, that in order to make change for the benefit of the environment, I needed to find people that were doing similar things. Maybe not studying birds, maybe thinking about climate change or trees. And that's how I found my way into the environmental sector. I wanted to build solidarity with other environmentalists to understand how environmentalism interacts with politics and knowledge mobilization. And I was really pleasantly surprised to find a thriving community of environmentalists here in London. Bird Friendly London is a grassroots program under the Bird Friendly Cities program that's organized by Nature Canada. We're just a small non-incorporated entity consisting of partners from London's non-for-profit sector, and we try and make London into a more bird-friendly city. So that means addressing leading threats to birds like predation by domestic cats and collisions with building windows. It means restoring and protecting habitat for birds, and also engaging the public in awareness and action to not only protect birds, but also to celebrate what it means to be bird friendly and the important roles birds play in our lives.
Yes. How do you garner interest or support of community members that maybe are not environmentally conservationally inclined to participate in your bird-friendly practices?
That is the golden question.
Yes.
How do we bring people along? Something that I personally challenge myself with, but also struggle with, is how to extend empathy to people that I might not agree with or I might not even like. Because if we're not talking to each other, if we're not having conversations with people who don't know the things that we already know, then we can't move forward. And so your question about how we reach out to folks that might not be environmentalists at heart, or maybe environmentalism looks a little different to them, is one that I reflect on often. Yes. I think birds have the benefit of being very charismatic. A lot of people care about them. They have personal relationships to them. It's not the same as oh, we need to protect insects, which are also declining, and that's very much related to protecting birds. I'm generally able to find common ground talking to people about the birds in their backyard versus the caterpillars. And so helping them to see birds in a connective way, as in thinking about the ways that birds interact with stuff that they do care about. So for example, I drink coffee. Do you drink coffee?
I drink tea.
Okay, you drink tea. That's fair. Not everybody drinks coffee, but a lot of people do.
Yes.
And when I explain to people that the same individual migratory birds that might be in your backyard and potentially at risk of crashing into your window in your home, in the fall, like right now, are on their way to their overwintering grounds, which could be in Central or South America, where your coffee is grown. That's important for them to understand because their coffee, the price of the coffee that they buy at the store, depends on the farmer's ability to grow that coffee without pests. And the birds eat the pests. So for the birds that we're losing, we have to replace those with things like pesticides that people don't want in their coffee. That's one example of many of the kinds of services that birds provide that people may take for granted, but they actually value when they pay attention to them. And when you link birds to things like coffee or other insects that affect agriculture or human health, or seed dispersal because people like having trees in their community, or pollination. Those are all ways of bridging values and helping people to understand birds in a more connective way.
You do a lot in community engagement within conservation. I follow you on social media, and I find that you share a lot about London, whether it's from different planning developments to birds to other species and everything. You do a lot and share a lot of knowledge. And I'm curious, you've kind of touched on it, but how you, one, why do you find it important to share this knowledge? And two, how do you have the mental capacity to keep kind of challenging the status quo?
Oh, those are really good questions.
And big questions.
Big question. In dealing with something like, I don't know, bird population declines, or the biodiversity crisis, or climate change, all of these things overlap, right? They're all interconnected. But how do you figure out what has to happen first? What fits in this matryoshka set of nesting crises? What is the biggest one we have to deal with? And I don't know if it's the biggest one, but I'd say it's one of the larger ones for sure. is a lack of civic awareness and engagement. It's a lack of people feeling motivated to engage with the decisions that are being made that affect our responses to these crises. So that's things like voting in elections, but it's also tracking decisions that are being made by different levels of government. It's understanding what the different levels of government are responsible for. It's understanding the historical context of why things are the way they are and what might need to change for things to get better. It's overwhelming, and I understand why people have a hard time following along with it. Nobody really taught me this stuff. You know, I went through high school civics like everyone does in the Ontario curriculum. I watch the news, but there's still a lot that kind of exceeds the bounds of the understanding that we're given. And the way that I've learned is through my community and by talking to people who are more knowledgeable than me. It's by experiencing it, so immersing myself in these spaces and attending meetings and like speaking up and taking feedback and being a bit experimental with it. I feel like if we get people engaged in making these decisions, who represents them in government, what the future looks like that we're all going to inherit, then people will start to be more caring, more invested in terms of like their individual approaches in their lifestyle, more likely to talk to their friends and family about what they're passionate about. And so I think it's important in a lot of ways. For me, it feels like at the core of environmentalism, how do we tell the stories that are going to spur the most action? Yes. And I don't want to be the only one telling those stories. I'm very conscientious about my positioning in society. I'm a cis white male from a well-educated background. I think we need other people telling those stories. And so finding ways to make space for them and bring them along is also part of the exercise. Your second question is, how do I have capacity to do this? My capacity varies from day to day, hour to hour. Yes. Sometimes I exceed it. I think that's really normal. I think of it capacity in terms of like the content, the semantic detail, the information. And then there's also the feeling, emotional side of capacity. And I find those often are correlated with one another, but they are independent, right? I might be thinking about something really complicated and I feel good about it. Something might be really simple, like I had a bird die in my hand earlier and my emotions are just taxed for the day. Yeah. How I handle it is by like checking in with myself really often. So seeing how I'm feeling, taking space if I need to, recognizing that like not everything needs to be done right away. I'm a person that tends to take on too many projects. I know that about myself. It's my toxic trait. And when I do that, I have to prioritize, right? Yes. So maybe some of these things can wait a little while. If people are depending on me, if we're working as a team, then I tend to put that first. But making sure that like my emotional well-being, my ability to think clearly, take care of myself, making time for self-care, those need to be really like paramount in my day-to-day.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on some committees that you're involved in, and I believe you're on one for the City of London. Is that correct?
That's right. I currently chair the Environmental Stewardship and Action Community Advisory Committee for the City of London. It's got a crazy acronym. It's like ESACAC. Yeah, I've been doing it for a couple years, and I was previously on a different advisory committee that was called EPAC, or Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee. And these committees have been such a privilege to be part of because it's taught me a lot about how local government works and some of the complexity around things like our urban forest and climate change planning at a city level. This committee and all advisory committees are made up of volunteer members of the community that contribute time each month to serve the priorities of their local government. They have different theme groups. So we've got an accessibility, we've got a diversity advisory committee. Ours is focusing on environmental stewardship and climate action, among other things. And it's a lot of young working professionals who meet once a month, and we discuss various things, such as items handed down to us from the city, things that might be coming up on a council agenda, reports that might be in the works, things that we're being asked for feedback on, as well as items that the community wants to bring forward. And so it's a two-way street of communication that has been really generative, not only for our ability to drive change and help put things on agendas for council's consideration, but also to educate the community about what's going on. I think some of the biggest challenges the city faces in their work are not that we're not doing climate action, it's that we're doing it, we're not sure how to communicate it properly. How do we help different audiences to understand what the city is doing and what they can do at an individual or collective level? So yeah, I wish more people knew about them and took advantage of that.
Yeah, well, where can people find information? Is it just like on London's website, or?
I would say the City of London's website is the best resource. If you just go on Google and search City of London advisory committees, you'll find a list of them. Okay. Mine is Environmental Stewardship in Action, and we meet at the same time each month. You can always reach out to the city if you want information about how to join a meeting.
And has working on this committee, doing your other advocacy work kind of created maybe tense or monumental moments within like discussing with politicians or discussing with city officials kind of thing in your life? Has it?
On the topic of birds crashing into buildings, which is what I study, I've had good conversations about it with folks at different levels of government. And it's a complicated issue that I think is split across the different levels of government. They have different responsibilities. Municipally, we've had progress in a bunch of different jurisdictions across Canada adopting bird-safe building design into local bylaws. I think that's a really important step, but ultimately what's needed is to have this be adopted at the provincial level. And in trying to do some of that work provincially, as in putting this in the building code of Ontario so that it's just required for all new building construction, I've learned what a fraught political dance that is. That it's not really about the merit or the legality of the proposal, it's about navigating, I guess, political relationships and ways that information can be represented, and timing is really important. When everything is on fire and we're in crises, I mean, who's paying attention to birds bumping into glass, realistically? And so that has frustrated me a bit, thinking about these issues as being really important to me and being aware of what they cost, the cost of inaction, and reconciling that with the way that politics work today. That it's really about the image of things, the aesthetics, sound bites, dealing with a public that's saturated with information and overtaxed. It's challenging to communicate some of these nuances, and that has frustrated me.
I want to kind of circle back to education and early professionals entering the field. How would you suggest those young professionals getting in the field where to look for jobs that are maybe in the outdoor sector, environmental, conservation kind of spheres?
I think it's going to look different for everybody, and a lot of the jobs that you might find fulfilling might not even exist yet because we're in a transition period, going from old ways of doing things to new things under what we call the green economy. And that's going to encompass all sectors, right? So existing corporations have to modernize their practices. They're going to have to think about sustainability to remain competitive in the marketplace. Whatever industry you work in will probably have some niche where you can find ways of bringing down greenhouse gas emissions, improving efficiency, reducing wastes internally. I think in terms of working outdoors or working on more, I guess, environmentally themed initiatives like tree planting, volunteering in the non-for-profit sector is a really good launching pad to get exposure to the issues being faced on the front lines at a local level. And that will make you aware of where there are needs that need to be filled. Those might be industrial needs, those might be information needs. Looking into what grants are available to develop things at a small scale, like project-based grants, can help you to innovate and think about maybe creating something new that's filling one of those needs. And there's a lot of support out there to help people get started. I would also say that as an environmentalist, we all need to eat, right? So if you've got a career and you're doing something that's not environmentally focused, that doesn't mean that you're not an environmentalist. It means that maybe you find other ways of slotting that into your life through volunteering you do on the weekends or through changes you make around the home. It's not an all or none. You're not an environmentalist or not. We have to all shift and pivot together. And I think, frankly, a lot of the ways we think about jobs and careers are serving this underlying norm of capitalism, of productivity, of generating wealth that needs to be re-examined a little bit, because that fundamentally needs to change as part of this transition. And I don't think we are empowered to think about that yet.
Yes.
I think we're heading there. So thinking about the value of the work that you do and who that serves is also part of the equation. It's not just about converting your career into something that sustains you. It's also about sustaining the planet and thinking about the products of your work sustaining future generations.
If there were any other tips you could give for people maybe still in their schooling, do you have any tips?
If you are in schooling, I would say be curious. Go down rabbit holes. That's what I do. You will find yourself learning about things and aspects of things, perspectives that you might not have thought of, and allow yourself to feel some of the hard things. If we are experiencing major upheaval because of climate change and biodiversity loss and other ongoing crises in society, that costs a lot emotionally. And I think we need to support each other in having those hard conversations and thinking about what our future looks like together. And so just be prepared for being part of a community, that you're not doing this by yourself. Finding other people who care about similar values and putting yourself out there will be what makes all the difference.
Now, I'm curious, what are the next steps after a PhD for Brendon?
Oh boy. If all goes according to plan, what I'm thinking about doing right now is finishing my PhD and then applying for something called a postdoctoral fellowship program, which, as I've explained to my parents, is not more school. After you finish a PhD, what's common for academics is to take a couple of years and work on a research project that's covered by a postdoctoral fellowship. I'm interested in doing a project that expands on my interest in bird window collisions, in thinking about how we mobilize sustainable financial tools to help retrofit buildings that are on the landscape and unfortunately killing birds in a way that maximizes the impact of those interventions. And so I'm fingers crossed that my funding application will be approved. I'd love to work on that for a couple of years and develop it. And beyond that point, I think I'm going to be a person that does a lot of things in my career. I don't think I'm going to be a 9-to-5 desk job kind of person. I'd love to continue working with the non-for-profit sector, maybe looking at roles working within government. I'm not sure yet. I love the academic adjacent space where you can work with scientists and people in academia doing teaching and building bridges into other parts of society that need connections to disciplines like science. So I don't know. You'll have to check back in with me in a few years.
I will. Thank you so much for chatting with us today. If anyone is interested in somehow being part of Bird Friendly London, how would they find more information?
If you visit birdfriendlylondon.ca, the first thing you'll see on our website is a big red northern cardinal. That's our city bird. But there's also links to our Facebook group, to our other social media channels, and that's a good way to find community. Because if you join our groups, you'll meet other people who are also interested in birds. We host various programs throughout the year, so we'll post updates on our website. There's lots of other great information about ways that individuals can help conserve birds in their backyards and in their communities, and our contact information is there. I'm thinking that Bird Friendly London is due for a refresh, and we'll probably be taking on new members to get involved, so stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your passions and knowledge and how we can get into this field. It's been a truly rewarding chat, so thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.
Until next time, see you in nature.